Hello and welcome to this webinar being run about technology in transformation. This is the latest in a series called Tipping Points, and it's all about how technology can help people and the planet save itself from the hazards of what we're seeing in terms of climate change and other things. My name is Toby Shapshak. I'm a technology journalist based here in Johannesburg, and I'm going to be speaking to some very smart people who are doing some very interesting things in the space of conservation in Africa. First up, we're going to hear from Bruce Jones, who's from EarthRanger, and Bruce is going to talk us through some of the quite remarkable things. Just to let you know how this is going to run, we are going to do a short introduction, and we're going to look at how innovative technology can be applied to transform conservation in Africa. So let's hear from you. Hello, Bruce.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, and thanks for inviting me onto the show. Yeah, as Toby said, I'm from an organization or a software platform called EarthRanger. It falls under the Allen Institute for Artificial Intelligence. And yeah, the way that it all started was there was definitely a problem out there. And it was initially highlighted by a project that our founder, Paul Allen, funded called the Great Elephant Census. And what this elephant census showed that in the previous 7 years or so, elephant populations across the continent had dropped by about 30%, or from 500,000 to about 350,000, which shocked a lot of people. And those numbers weren't across the whole, or weren't consistent across the whole of the continent. Some places they were dropping a lot faster, and other places they were actually growing. So what the team did is we went out into the field to a couple of sites in Africa to see what the real issues were and how information is gathered in the field. And what they came back with was, if you look in the top right of the picture there, a lot of paper forms that had been completed, telling people what they'd observed in the field. And those were filed away and never really used, which didn't really do much for anybody. Similarly, protected area managers were managing patrols using pins in boards, and as you can see in the bottom right picture. So that would indicate where people were in the field, and they knew where they were because people would radio in and say they were next to this dam or that road, etc. But that was not very useful, especially from a real-time point of view. So having this information out there, the guys thought, well, how can we automate this? And so talking to all these people, they came up with the idea of EarthRanger. So what EarthRanger does is it's basically a map-based platform where a lot of information from a lot of different sources come into a common platform. So in the top right of this picture, you'll see a large screen, which is a depiction of EarthRanger. And on that screen, there'll be positions of live positions of rangers, of ecologists, of animals, of aircraft, vehicles. Anything that can be tracked from a number of different sources would then go through into EarthRanger to be displayed so that the protected area managers can see what's going on. Similarly, a lot of the different field observations, which can be captured on mobile devices in the field, would then be fed back into EarthRanger. And these could range from ecological data through law enforcement data, human-wildlife conflict information. Anything that is relevant to protected area can come into the common platform so that the different departments can see what's going on in the system. And very briefly, we connect to a lot of different systems that are out there and bring it all into one platform. So the different ways that this information can be used, the first one is that operations management can use it to manage the protected areas. And here you can see a number of different screens on the wall with different views of the same information, or different information viewed differently, coming into an operations center. And here they can do a lot of command and control, situational analysis type of work, and direct people out in the field, depending on what type of work they need to do. And one of those types is patrol management. So you can manage your patrols, you can see where they're going. If, say, spoor or snares have been found in a particular area, you can direct your rangers because you know exactly where they are, you know where the snares or the spoor have been picked up, and you can direct them accordingly to go and set up ambushes or cut off any sort of poachers. You can also then see how far the guys have walked, where they have walked, where they haven't walked, and manage your patrols effectively. Similarly, from a wildlife monitoring point of view, you can look at animal movement behaviors. If you look at that elephant on the right-hand side, you can see the top part of a collar, which is a satellite tracking collar, sticking out the top of his head there. That's a necklace. And so you could then see where the animals are, understand their home ranges, see when they are crossing outside of a protected area into villages, so that you can alert villagers that animals are on their way. And then similarly on the left here, the ranger there is monitoring a pack of wild dogs. So this enables people to understand animal behavior more easily. Similarly, you can manage your ecology a lot better. So you can take field observations of what's happening from a veld condition point of view. You can see how your woodlands are doing, and get a lot of information in, which you can then at a later stage analyze and make decisions on at a later stage. And these all get fed back into one central point for the analysis. Remote monitoring is done through satellite imagery. In this case, what we're looking at is deforestation events through a system called Global Forest Watch's GLAD alerts. So you can then pick up where deforestation events are taking place. And similarly, NASA has, and a couple of other providers have got satellites that go over and pick up where fires are, so that you can be alerted to where there's a fire and go and deal with them quickly. And then all of this information can be shared across different organizations. One of the places is in Kenya, where Kenya Wildlife Services receives a lot of information into all of their different protected areas. And then that information in a consolidated way gets fed up to headquarters. And this can also happen across organizations as well, from a conservation organization to a protected area. For instance, tracking elephants. If you're an elephant tracking organization, you could share that with protected areas as well, or vice versa. And we're doing a lot of work with vulture tracking at the moment as well, across a number of different organizations. So yeah, in a nutshell, 300 sites across the world, starting in Africa. But yeah, we've had phenomenal growth and people are seeing a lot of value. So that's it from my side. Back to you, Toby.
Thank you very much for that. And we are going to hear now from someone who's doing some very interesting work in Kenya herself, and that's Irene Amoko from the Kenya Wildlife Trust. And this really is a phenomenal organization. Hi, Irene. Please tell us a little bit about your operation.
I'm sorry, I was having a few technical challenges. Thank you so much, Toby, and it's a pleasure to be here with everyone today. I work for the Kenya Wildlife Trust. We are a local organization founded in Kenya about 15 years ago. And our main work is focusing on predator conservation. We have a big footprint in the Masai Mara, and we run our flagship predator program right there, and it's the Mara Predator Conservation Program. A lot of our work uses robust science and evidence-based to guide us in creating and implementing predator conservation strategies across the Mara. And KWT's value proposition is that we are driven by science and focused on people. And a lot of our science is supported by technology. And so I'll talk about some of the really specific problems that we face in the Mara and how we are using technology or trying to adapt technology into the work that we do all the time. I think a lot of the times and a lot of the work we look at is around predator-human conflict. And as you can see on the screen, we've got incidents where we've got the big cats getting in and attacking livestock. And in retaliation, we have, the lions getting speared, poisoned, killed. So what we try to do, and we've got a team down in the Mara, is to promote coexistence and work with communities to come up with strategies that can help, both livestock, people, and wildlife live in this ecosystem together. And so some of our big challenges is how we can stay consistent in the work we do while providing solutions to a lot of the emerging conservation problems, including climate change, as Toby mentioned in the beginning. So we use technology in lots of different ways. We have camera traps, we use GPS satellite collaring, we use cyber tracker to collect data out in the field, and that's easier than the old pen and paper method. And so we've managed to get our work more effective, quicker, to collect. In terms of the outputs, we use geographical information systems to be able to showcase some of the work we've done. So you'll be able to see some of the collared animals. We're able to track their movements. That then gives us real-time information on where some of these predators are. And we're able to then communicate to the communities and advise on how to graze, but also warning them, in terms of how to secure their livestock. We are able to come up with conflict hotspots. So at the bottom of the screen is a heat map that shows areas that have high conflict, and with that we're able to then focus strategies in the right place. So as we know, conservation always is short funded, so making sure that resources are focused in the most important places to start with. But we are also able to use technology to collect lots of other different data. So things like human settlements, we are able to map rivers and roads as well, and towns and other social infrastructure. And just like Bruce said, we've also started using EarthRanger to be able to showcase the work we are doing. And that gives our team a more holistic view of where animals are, but then it allows us to feed our information to the Kenya Wildlife Services and other conservation organizations. But we're also able to share our work across the various partners and stakeholders in the Mara ecosystem. So what do we see the future as, with technology? Obviously we want to be able to collect, to store, to share, and to analyze our data even better. And some of the challenges arise around how we can effectively do that. So at Kenya Wildlife Trust, we are really open to new ideas, innovative techniques. So we've been running hackathons involving young people, across Kenya and Africa, and obviously across the world as well, to try and come up with innovative solutions to help us make our work easier. And so a lot of new things right now are around using artificial intelligence to help individually identify species. So whether it's lions or zebras or cheetah or tigers in Asia, a lot of that's coming up. The use of blockchain in conservation is a really big thing, and we're very excited about the possibilities that are open to us. And so, we are confident that there is a future, a brighter future for technology in conservation, but then being very cognizant of some of the challenges that we face in terms of funding, because technology is not cheap. We look at, capacity building and the gap in technical skill among conservationists. So making sure that people are constantly upskilled is something that we have at the back of our minds. But then also, the lack of coordination amongst the various players in conservation. EarthRanger, again, one way where people can then share data on a common platform. And then finally, trying to make sure that a lot of the technology is customized. If you're working with big data, that then gets costly. But at the end of it, we are really hopeful and really excited about all the new, tech bits that are coming into conservation. Yeah, and that's it from me. Thank you very much.
I mean, that's an understatement of quite what the Kenya Wildlife Trust does. I mean, it is an extraordinary organization. Thank you very much for that, Irene. And if anyone would like to ask questions, please do so in the chat box. If you don't mind just introducing yourself, just so we know who you are. And next up, we're going to hear from Matthew Child from the South African National Biodiversity Institute. Very interesting stuff you're about to hear. Hello, Matthew.
Good morning, colleagues. How are you? Thank you so much for being here today. I look forward to talking with you. Let me just do this for a second. Okay, set my timer on. Okay, so Africa has a problem. We are simultaneously tasked with conserving a lot of the planet's biodiversity, as well as ensuring that a rapidly increasing population can create livelihoods and develop. So how can we use technology to identify the trade-offs and enable opportunities associated with nature-based solutions? In this talk, it's a joint effort between myself and my colleagues on Defensa, and we've been working together on how remote sensing can be used to quantify aspects of the wildlife economy and enable better decision-making. Of course, remote sensing is a fundamental catalyst for achieving change and a key tool for enabling conservation solutions at scale. However, to quote George Monbiot, there are no magic wands. Technology is a tool that can be deployed to make things better or worse. It is not a substitute for confronting power. I'd like you to just keep that in mind throughout this talk. While conservationists can't be everywhere, but luckily satellites can. We have the ability to measure every inch of the Earth with increasing accuracy and resolution. There are currently 2,666 satellites orbiting Earth, and nearly a third of these are for Earth observations. So we can harness the power of these satellites to measure and monitor biodiversity patterns at broad scales. For example, this map is all 459 of the original extent of South Africa's ecosystems. And we can use remote sensing to quantify habitat loss and thus understand which ecosystems are threatened. This is the work that SAMBI does, and we package these results into syntheses like the National Biodiversity Assessment to measure progress or the lack thereof towards international conservation targets. We can also combine satellite imagery with open access tech platforms like Global Forest Watch, which was mentioned before, or even just Google EarthRanger to monitor biodiversity loss through time, like this series from the Amazon, and provide robust evidence that yes, we have a problem, despite what Bolsonaro says. So remote sensing is very effective for measuring what we've lost, but it becomes more complicated when we try to use this to tell stakeholders what should be done on the land, and thus how to create or incentivize positive change. For example, the Normalized Difference Vegetation Index is a very common indicator that we use. It measures plant greenness and is thus a proxy of plant productivity, which is in turn used as a proxy for ecosystem function and even biodiversity. NDVI is used in applied decision-making as diverse as protected area design, restoration monitoring, and even assessments of carbon sequestration. This indicator can be severely misused. And that's because NDVI works better for ecosystems that can be more clearly measured from space like forests than for grasslands, which can look the same from space when degraded or intact. For example, this series of images from KwaZulu-Natal shows a declining productivity trend over time due to the expansion of urban and agricultural land uses. The highlighted pixel there that I hope you can see shows a transition from woody cover to settlements. So in this case, it's probably safe to assume that lower productivity is bad for biodiversity. However, we do the same analysis in the Drakensberg escarpment. Fixed point photography shows the encroachment of woody plants between 1948 and 2018. This is obviously a grassland ecosystem. And here productivity increases over time as woody plants invade the grasslands. Now we know as scientists from a biodiversity point of view, this is bad. And from a livelihoods point of view, it's even worse because while woody plants might mean greater above ground biomass, it reduces the amount of grass biomass available. So livestock farmers and game ranchers who rely on the grazing capacity of rangelands to earn a living will lose their livelihoods, even though total above ground storage is increasing. Thus, using productivity trends without interpreting the landscape and socioeconomic context could actually undermine wildlife economies in Africa. And that's exactly what started to happen. The fact that forests and trees are easier to measure from space, and that the subsequent carbon storage of these systems is easier to quantify, means that the global north's perception of nature-based solutions in Africa and the funding for it has been directed towards massive tree planting initiatives as both a restoration technique and a carbon storage strategy through mechanisms like the Bond Challenge. But this is really only applicable or relevant on half the continent at best, and can be downright damaging in grassy and savanna ecosystems. So this is a major problem when you view carbon finance as a means to redistribute wealth from polluting countries to Africa, if it comes at the cost of destroying the ability of rangelands to support inclusive economies based on grazing lands. So what's the solution? Well, we should simply see tech and remote sensing as a conversation starter with landowners and communities, and not the final say. For example, a map of soil carbon at the land parcel scale can prompt a more meaningful conversation about what management interventions would be appropriate for that enterprise. What would the opportunity cost be and the potential revenues from doing things differently? How can this impact job creation and beneficiation and thus broader development goals? What are the risks of changing the business model to a nature-based solution? And what does that mean for the long-term resilience of wildlife economies? These are questions at a human scale that we haven't quite harnessed in the technology. And we can and should find a way to integrate these trade-offs into the tech tools themselves, such as through interactive dashboards that can help people to understand restoration and rewilding in the context of their bottom lines. And we need to co-design this with the actual stakeholders. So in conclusion, unfortunately, there is no shortcut for conservation in Africa, and tech cannot help us to shortcut this. We have to get out there and engage, ranch by ranch, rangeland by rangeland, forest by forest. Tech can help us to communicate, but it cannot supplant social capital. We need to get boots on the ground, especially young people, who must learn the skills of navigating complex social, ecological, and socioeconomic systems. We need to create a cohort of young professionals who can operate at the science policy practice nexus. And that is where the funding from the global north should go, not to planting trees, and not to building big tech solutions that ultimately mean very little for the people on the ground. It is the social bonds and trust created through long-term relationships that will bring about systemic and long-lasting change in our landscapes, and is also necessary to confront the power of those who make decisions on our behalf, to paraphrase Monbiot. Because at the end of the day, satellites won't save the continents, we will. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. That was really interesting, Matthew. And I don't think you can, you know, are there still people who dispute the effect of climate change on the planet? But when you see those photographs of the Amazon, it's pretty terrifying. I feel a little worried about the state of the planet. So that's why things like this are so important. And I have a personal anecdote about George Monbiot, which I will tell you afterwards, but I don't want to distract from our next speaker, who is Lebo Leach from Habitat XR. Over to you, Lebo.
Thanks, Toby, and hi, everybody. I think I'm going to echo a lot of what Matthew said, in that we really need to be the ones to save ourselves in this fight for our planet. Let me share my screen. Can you see my screen, Toby?
I can indeed. You might want to just press play in your presentation. There you go.
So I'm Lebo Leach. I'm a producer at Habitat XR. And we are an impact-led content production studio that leverages the power of immersive technology to really reconnect people to nature. What does that mean? Well, borrowing a little bit from what Matthew said, we believe conservation is really not a wildlife problem, it's a people problem. And we then focus our efforts on how do we rally people to participate in this conversation. So when I say immersive technology, I'm really speaking about augmented reality, holograms, virtual reality, location-based installations, whatever technology is appropriate for the problem that we're trying to solve. So why immersive technology? Immersive technology is a really powerful tool to build empathy and to connect people to places that they necessarily haven't been. Stanford University has been doing research over the past 10 years to think about how we can really hack the brain and inspire behavior change. And this is and they've focused on virtual reality as one of their most significant tools. And they've coined a term called telepresence. And what telepresence really is, the heart of it, is the ability for an immersive experience to tell the mind that the body is in a place where it isn't. And in this way, if a person is appropriately immersed, we're able to convince them that they are in the Himalayas or face-to-face with a gorilla, places that the average person really wouldn't be able to go. And once they're in that space, it stops being a moment of observation and starts being a moment of engagement. And once a moment of engagement, it's a personal story. You were there, you hung out with the rhino for a few minutes, and it's a memory in your heart. And at the end of that experience, you're a little bit more open to a conversation about what the cost of that animal or that biome not being there anymore could be to you in a personal way. So how do we leverage this in an everyday scenario? So we partner with global not-for-profits and other organizations that are interested in conservation, and we collaborate with them to tell stories or to find ways to create impact to amplify the work that they're doing. The Dian Fossey Fund, the Marine Megafauna Foundation, and WWF are 3 case studies that I'm going to share that kind of highlight the 3 key areas where we believe in over the past 9 years of operation, we've been able to see exponential impact. And those areas are raising funds, helping with environmental education, as well as inspiring policy change, be it from a funder perspective or from a government collaboration point of view. So I'm going to start with the conversation that we had with the Marine Megafauna Foundation based in Mozambique, where they were interested in protecting the coastline there and establishing no-take zones. And we created a short experience for them that they could show to a boutique set of high net worth individuals, as well as key stakeholders in government, who were able to quickly make decisions around what needs to happen with the loss of marine biodiversity in that area. So with this 2-minute or 2 to 5 minute experience, the head of MMF was able to then speak to a couple of presidents, a couple of billionaires, and in just a few meetings, we're able to raise billions of rands to establish new no-take zones, and are in the process of establishing new marine protected areas. How we worked with partners to raise funds, a story close to my heart particularly is the work that we did with WWF, when they were really wanting to rally communities around what we're going to do about the rhino crisis, as well as the elephant-human conflict. So we created an experience where we cast people's mind or audience members' minds 50 years into the future, where rhinos are extinct, God forbid, as well as elephants. And this grandmother is talking to her grandchildren, and she's showing the children images of the animals in a holographic state. So telepresence is able not only to tell you that you are in a different place, but it allows your mind to believe you're in a different time. So at the end of 2 gala nights, one in Cape Town and one in Johannesburg, people in the audience were literally in tears at the possibility of living in a world where they themselves or their children were not able to visit or even see a rhino in real life. And in those 2 nights, they were able to raise about the same amount of money that they would over a full fiscal year of fundraising. Environmental education, we did a project with the Dian Fossey Fund up in Rwanda, and partnered with the Ellen DeGeneres Fund as well. In the 50 years of operating in Rwanda, the Dian Fossey Fund hadn't had a space of its own. So they really wanted to establish a campus. And the campus wasn't just for themselves, but also for the community, because they're interested in not only protecting gorillas, but also creating a deep connection between the community and the wildlife that surrounds them. Because typically, to trek gorillas costs about $1,500. That is inaccessible for the average person, and more especially the average child in Rwanda. So people can go a whole lifetime without coming face to face with this animal that seems to be taking away their land or access to opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. So how do we bridge that gap? And on the Dan Fossey campus, we deployed 3 key technologies. We built an immersive studio, an immersive theater where kids can come in and feel like they're at the top of the Virungas and see what it is to kind of hang out with the gorillas. We also put together a virtual reality story so that you could have a one-on-one engagement, a day in the life, as it were, with gorillas, and also deployed an augmented reality experience so that you could have the visceral feeling of walking through the gardens of the campus and feel like you're spending a day with the silverback. All of this really excites us. I mean, we're living in an incredible time where technology is becoming more accessible, and we really are able to do things that were not even imaginable about a decade ago. And the power of storytelling, we think, is an incredible weapon that we can use to change people's hearts and minds and protect the planet. Thanks, guys. That's it for me.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Lebo. And it's really fascinating. I must say, I'm very heartened to hear the names of so many significant personalities and celebrities and stars spending their money on really good things, which is saving the planet. Next up, we're just going to chat a little bit about some of the impacts of this. We have some questions, so I'm going to go through those quickly. The first one is from Yingsina to Irene. Have you guys started incorporating remote sensing data to provide real-time solutions? Over to you, Irene.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, we have. So we use NDVI. We use remote sensing to enable us to understand changes in land use and land cover. And, you know, that in itself also explains a lot of what's happening with the big cat use of space. And, you know, as we've seen climate change, and one way of understanding the impact of climate change is looking at NDVI and just the changes in land cover over a period of time. Yeah.
Thank you, Irene. Bruce, do you want to add anything there, or you ready for your next question, which is from Howard Friedman has asked, how much does EarthRanger cost?
Yeah, I actually forgot to mention that earlier. Thanks for the question, Howard. Yeah, the really nice thing about working for the Allen Institute is that EarthRanger doesn't cost a cent for the end user. All of the hosting and the software development and support is covered by the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation. So it doesn't cost the end user a cent, which is great. Yeah, thanks for the question.
Yeah, that's really great. I'm very pleased to hear that. That very good art collection is going to help keep funding this for a long time still. Another question from Yingsani. What type of sensors have you applied thus far? Any studies conducted that relates predetermined species to environmental factors? I'm not sure if the word is predetermined or predated species to environmental factors.
Yeah, so what I'll do is in the chat, I will put a link to a website that has a list of publications that just shows the results from the various work we've done, you know, using land use and land cover changes, and how we've related that to both predator and prey, you know, behavior in the Mara. Yeah.
Thank you, Irina. And we have a comment, it looks like, not so much a question, from Janet Snow, and it says, to continue from what Matthew and Lebo mentioned, it is important to have education projects which focus on environment, but also include the ability to understand systems, thinking complexities and loop effects. Thank you for putting so many big words into one sentence, Janet. I hope I did them proud. Yes, I agree. I mean, the thing that I really have taken away from what several speakers have said is that, you know, like Matthew said, we don't need trees. We need to train people about why looking after our environments and the environment immediately around us is so important. Next question is from Mike, and it's for Matt. It says, while technology and remote sensing is critical in determining spatial patterns within rangelands, for example, there must be skilled technicians in the field to calibrate these devices, what we are and calibrate what we are observing using this technology. Maybe we should be training more people in the field, says Mike, and has asked for your comments, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I was hoping that you would chime in there to sense check what I was saying. Absolutely. I think that's the most critical thing, because there's two reasons for that, I suppose. The one is that, as you know, most of the machine learning algorithms that are used to produce wall-to-wall maps of things like biodiversity loss or carbon or whatever are based on very limited in-field samples. So absolutely, we need to get more people out there to collect those samples, refine, or at least, to use your word, calibrate what we're looking at from remote sensing to make sure that it's verified on the ground and ground truth. So that's from the technical aspect. So we always need to be collecting that data and training people how to do that. But then, as I mentioned in my talk, from a social point of view, it's important to bring the landowners to have this cohort of technicians or professionals who can interact with the landowners and communities, help them sense check what they're seeing, help them understand what conservation is talking about, and also then help them to make the decisions that would be necessary to improve conservation on that land, or at least in context of the various trade-offs that we have when economics meets biodiversity. So yeah, I really think that tech is sort of the last thing on the value chain that we should be looking at, and we should really be focusing on getting people out into the field, interacting and learning with the stakeholders that they are engaging with. So yeah, I completely agree with that. Thanks.
Indeed. There is one more question, and it's again for you, Matthew. And it is, do you think that open data and data transparency could potentially open up new funding for conservation? And if so, why? That's from Alessandro. It's a nice lowball question, Alessandro. I mean, I could answer that for you, and the answer is yes, but Matthew's much better at saying more than yes. I don't know about you, but whenever people ask me, Matthew, they go, can I ask you a question? I always go, no, just to see how they respond. So yes, no, over to you, Matthew.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, obviously the resounding question, the resounding answer to that is yes. And I think that's because once we have this open access data and data layers, it opens up. So instead of effort going into gathering that information and collating that information on a technical level, it can go towards applied conservation. So then we can start to understand like the business models that are going into it, the opportunity costs, the revenue generating abilities of that land to do different things, and then to work with different sectors. So it would open up a whole new frontier for conservationists to be able to attract not only philanthropic funding, but importantly, private investments into nature-based solutions or different wildlife economy enterprises. Yeah, so it would really help us to focus on the positive impacts of what that data are enabling us to say, rather than constantly trying to invest in actually getting the data, from various siloed institutions, and I suppose reinventing the wheel in many ways, because if people have collected this data before, and they're not able to share it, or they don't want to share it, then we have to keep going out there and getting the same thing over and over again. And there is so much scope for us to be able to build knowledge products, infographics, decision support tools, to be able to show the potential of biodiversity to create economies, rather than demonstrate that there is a value there, and to be able to then use that to attract a much broader array of funding sources, particularly the private sector. So yeah, I totally agree with that. Thanks.
I totally agree with you. From Kudzai, for Irene and Bruce, I suppose the possibility of geotagging problematic species such as elephant and lion could be a game changer if enough funding is available in areas where this conflict is intense. Has this approach been tested in the Masai Mara?
Yeah, I can answer that as well. So we have a number of users in the area. We've got the Mara Conservancy and the Mara Triangle. We've got Mara Elephant Project. A little bit further away, we've got organizations like Lion Landscapes, the Western Lions, and their primary work is around human wildlife conflict and to try and mitigate it. And a lot of animals are collared, elephants and lions and a couple of other animals. And what you can do is you can set up what are called geofences. So that is just a line drawn on a map where if one of those animals crosses over that geofence boundary, an alert will be sent through to the authorities. So typically the way that happens, what happens is that if an elephant or a lion is heading towards a village that has got a geofence boundary around it, when they cross over, it triggers an alert, and then the officials send out people to go and chase the animals away, and they also simultaneously alert key personnel in the villages. So that is used a lot in all over Africa. Irene, do you want to add to that?
Yes, thanks, Bruce. I think first, conservation funding will never be enough. But then we've got to really prioritize which animals we collar. So yes, we collar lions in the Mara. And, as KWT, we focus more on subadult males that are young, male lions looking for new territory. So they are the troublemakers and tend to move into, community land, and also females just, moving around looking for food. And that allows us to know where the conflict hotspots were. So if you remember, the map that I showed during my presentation, that's, one way we've used the collars and, coupled that with reports that we've gotten from the community. So yes, collaring is really important. And not just for us, but for the authorities, and us being able to pass on this information to communities who are affected by these predators. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because data is the source of everything, isn't it? We live in this world of availability of data. I must say, my wife and I went on honeymoon to the Masai Mara, and we were really just amazed at the depth and the breadth and the stunning beauty of it all. I mean, it really is a truly remarkable place. I mean, it's one of those places we need to make sure survives. Are there any other questions that anyone would like to ask? I'm just having a look to see what's in the question box. But I'd like to just come back, Bruce, to you just briefly, because I mean, it's a fascinating tool that you have available, and the ability to use these satellite images, especially, and Matthew, some of the stuff you were talking about, it's a very powerful way to visually demonstrate. I mean, we are people clearly interested in conservation or technology, or both together. We're kind of we're the converted. You're preaching to the converted. Are there ways to communicate this to people visually? Because you just can't refute those photographs. You can see global warming happening in the Amazon just with pictures. I'm quite sure you run campaigns like this.
Toby, yeah, we're in a slightly different environment in that we provide software platforms, and the users of our platforms own the data. So it's really up to them to share data, and see the comments about sharing data. So it's really up to those organizations. And we do have, we've got EarthRanger, which is used by protected area managers and conservation organizations. But we've also created what we refer to as a public-facing map, which is intended to be used by those organizations to display positions of animals from their websites. And you can apply a little bit of metadata to each of the animals. So this is giraffe's name, this is a little bit of its history, its offspring, etc. So people can see what's happening in the landscapes. And that's also being applied now to sharks in New Zealand. So all over the show, people are using the public-facing map. So that really just shows positions of the animals. But sharing photographs of landscapes and animals, that's very easy to do. The images are there. It's really up to the protected areas themselves and the conservation organizations to share that data. And sometimes the data is quite sensitive. You don't want to share the live locations of endangered species. And other times you do want to show what you've got in a place. So it's a fairly complex topic and does have some sensitivities around it as well. But technically, the data's there. The people who own it can and do share it. Toby, you're on mute.
There you go. I thought there might be more questions, but because we've got a little bit more time, I just want to ask the speakers maybe to just sum up 3 or 4 minutes each, just your thoughts in general, and any action points or any responses to questions that you've heard. And let's start with you, Irene.
Thank you, Toby. I think one of the things that's been clear is just the range of possibilities out there and how technology can and continues to make and drive conservation, but then taking into account the comment about training people on the ground, about education, and being able to take responsibility for what's happening with climate change, and how can we go about in adapting and not just mitigating. And that's a conversation that's been had. We've just had COP27, and that keeps on coming around. And I've seen someone in the comment asking about coloring every animal. We obviously would not want to color every lion out there. We would get representatives, so the prides that are living closest to people are our targets. And there's also a comment about not calling them problematic animals because they share the space. And for us, we really believe in coexistence and trying to promote that, not necessarily teach it to the people because they're already coexisting, but how do we incentivize people to be there? Because it is a challenge for us to stay consistent and provide solutions to all these emerging problems while making sure that people and their livelihoods are not negatively affected. And so I'm really excited and looking forward to trying and using a lot of these new solutions that are out there to keep driving conservation both on the continent and beyond. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. And over to you, Lebo.
I think the conversation's been really, really interesting. And to echo, I think one of the questions that was asked earlier around, maybe I think it was you, Toby, about accessibility of the images and accessibility of the information. When you are knee deep in the business of conservation, we forget that we are like a niche group of superheroes trying to do this work. And I'm hopeful that technology will make the work of amplifying the need and calling on more people to kind of make this an issue that is day-to-day for themselves, amplifying that call to action, because I think the climate change narrative is a lot more mainstream, but we are losing species every year. Every month animals are going extinct, and that is not really spoken about at the same volume, as it were. But with technology, I think there's an opportunity to get the message out there and to tell these compelling stories in an exponential way, and therefore reach more people.
Indeed. I mean, you say superheroes, and I want to say Wakanda forever. Thank you so much. Matthew, over to you, and then Bruce, you're last. You were first, you're last, and then I'm going to... and just to let everybody know, you can stick around afterwards for a further 30 minutes for a less formal chat. You know, please do turn on your cameras and join us. And I just have to say, Matthew, really nice ceiling fan.
Thank you. Yeah, I chose it myself. No, I'm actually I'm in a different room at the moment. But yeah, it is it's quite a effect behind me. Sorry about that. So I think in summary, what I would suggest is that at the moment, because of the ease and the ease of open access satellite imagery and the increasing access to finely resolved data is a great thing, to echo some of the comments both from the speakers and one of the questions. But because it's been so accessible and we can produce indicators and metrics on that, there's been a surge of tech platforms that simply do that. So they go from the top down and they produce indicators and they produce landscape patterns and all sorts of like really amazing looking and amazing sounding information and dashboards. But it really means very little at the end of the day unless you are reporting on trends. So I would say that the time is now for us to go try a different approach, go from the bottom up, interact with people who are actually living with wildlife, who need to make decisions around wildlife, who need to make trade-offs, understand the opportunity costs to doing restoration activities, and understand from them what are the barriers from implementing those changes, and then how can tech help us to achieve that. So build in the socioeconomics layer, build in the socio-ecological layer into tech, and you might find that at the end of the day, we create platforms that are a little bit simpler, but have richer information that can enable better decision making to allow people on the ground to actually make change, rather than just seeing what they're in. Not really addressing the question of like, okay, well, what is the bottom line for me, and what would it mean to restore land or to rewild or to do any other change? And I think that's where we need to start moving, is to go from the bottom up and build up tech as we need in context of that socioeconomic system. Thanks.
Thank you. But before you go, we've got a question from Carmen, Matt, that I'm going to ask you and Bruce to respond to as well, which is, what do you think about making access to using drones as an ecological research tool, making this available to ecologists and researchers more broadly? I understand the hesitancy of this in case of everyday users, but surely drones could revolutionize data collection and important information needed for better informing conservation strategies. And Carmen points out that animals aren't very sensitive to the use of drones, but current legislation is very restrictive or unclear. What are your thoughts on the future use of drones for conservation, which you touched on it earlier, both Matthew and Bruce, and I think it's a fascinating use of available technology. Drones are very stable, very reliable, and can fly long distances and can see things that you can't normally, or you'd need a helicopter to see them. So tell us what you think from the ceiling fan room, Matthew.
Yeah, I mean, clearly drones are going to play an increasingly important role in not only in getting increasingly fine resolution data. I mean, the ability of drones to map at the scale of a property or a land parcel is truly incredible, and you can collect a lot of information very efficiently. But I would say again, we should try and avoid the build it and they will come mentality. So that paper that I think Karen shared on the informatics side and open access data argument, one of the opening sentences is, we're drowning in information. This is the age of data, but we can't really make sense of that information. So we would again have to structure that drone deployment very carefully to understand what question we're actually trying to answer before we just go and collect reams of data and then drown everyone in it again. And of course, from the legislation side, yeah, it is a bit unclear. And of course, we have to think about things like POPI and privacy issues. You don't just want drones flying around. But I think if we could come up with a set of very important developments and conservation questions that could be answered using drones strategically, or at least as to make landowners or communities or protected area managers aware of what the drones would be useful for in that particular context, then there would be, a great opportunity to deploy that technology, as they're also becoming increasingly cheap. So yeah, a little bit of a mixed answer there.
Thank you very much. And over to you, Bruce. But before we do that, I just want to say thank you to the Oppenheimer Generations Research and Conservation Organization for holding these tipping point seminars. There's a lot more information on the website, and there is a link in the chat where you can get some of the other studies, and you can see both this webinar and others. And the next tipping point webinar will be on the 23rd of February next year. Over to you, Bruce. And I must say, lovely view from outside your house. Behind you. Bruce is frozen. And he's back. Right, I think we might have lost Bruce. But there's a lot of information. The website is there for you. ogresearchconservation.org, ogresearchconservation.org. We seem to get these messages. There you are, Bruce, you're back.
I'm back.
And the final word is yours.
Oh, thank you very much. If I may answer that drone question as well. We've been involved with a lot of users who've tried drones and they failed, and others that are continuing to use them. And it depends on what you want to use them for. If you do want to do more ecological studies of vegetation and woodlands, etc., it all depends on, well, there are three main components to a drone. There's the airframe, there's the payload, and there's the data that you collect and what you do with it. So airframes these days, fixed wing aircraft can have longer range, longer duration, which means that they can cover a lot more area. And those are really the way that you want to go if you're going to be doing long transects in an area to pick up data. If you do want to do more tactical type of work, a multi-rotor might help. And I know some of our users do that for anti-poaching work at night, where they use a payload that has an infrared camera, where they can, if they know that there's some action in a particular area, they'll go straight to that area, fly over it and pick up images using infrared. And so those are working, but it depends a lot on what you want to, what you plan to do with the drones. So from the tactical to the strategic, and gathering more scientific information. You could even conceivably do animal censuses using drones, but you'd need bigger fixed-wing drones to cover bigger areas, and light aircraft are typically used for those sorts of things. So with any technology, and this is also to address one of the earlier questions, technology is always evolving. It's always getting cheaper and more effective, and goes to those collars. Satellite collars are very expensive, but there's new technology like LoRa networks that are, you need a bit of infrastructure in the fields, but then the devices are very cheap. And then who knows, if Starlink gets to our part of the world, then tracking devices and other remote sensing devices are going to become a lot more cost effective. So every 6 months we are adding new technology to our system that is becoming cheaper and more cost effective. And I think that's the nice thing about technology in general, not only in conservation, but in general, things get cheaper and more cost effective. So yeah, as we move, so will technology. So that's it from our side. Thanks, Toby.
That is such a good point, Bruce, and it's negligent of me not to have brought that up sooner, because if Starlink is available, and I understand it is available in a couple of Southern African countries, it is a game changer in terms of connectivity and coverage, internet connectivity. Thank you very much for joining this webinar. I thought it was really fascinating. I was very pleased to be invited to participate. I really do think technology can play a significant role in making the world a better place, not just at the personal level where smartphones give us access to everything on the internet, but ways for people to participate, as has been described in this webinar. There are incredibly good uses of the technology. I didn't catch all the names, but thank you, Paul, Alan, and everybody else who has given their money towards this, because, you know, Africa in many ways is like kind of like the green lung of the planet. We are, you know, as I joked once, humanity was invented in Africa. So what we need to do is what all of these good people are doing. So thank you very much, everybody who's been joining us. You can read more on the Oppenheimer Generations Research and Conservation website, ogresearchconservation.org, and the next Tipping Point webinar will be on the 23rd of February next year. And of course, on the website, there's a bunch of other webinars and really interesting resources. So thank you very much. We're going to hang around for another half an hour and be able to speak informally. But thank you very much to the organizers, and thank you very much to the panelists for your time today. My name's Toby Shapshak. Thank you very much for joining us.